Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Global Cards Collectors, and I'm here with Nazim today, and we're going to be talking all things cricket cards. We're going to be talking about life. We're going to be talking about cricket. We're going to be talking about all sorts of different things. So, Nazim, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to the listeners, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. My friends all call me Naz, so please feel free to do the same. Where do I begin? I guess I'll begin at the beginning. So, born in Africa, East Africa. War took my family across to Australia, just a random thing that we ended up in Australia as a result of the war in 72. I think we were one of the very few skin tone challenged people in little Bathurst in New South Wales. So very, very different times because it was early days since I think government policies were starting to open up their immigration policies to a lot more countries. Anyhow, we ended up in Australia in 72. Then circumstance took us to Pakistan in 76 because my mum's side of the family were in Pakistan and dad had gotten gravely ill. So we moved again. So there I was, 8 years old in Pakistan, learning the lingo. I had no concept of Urdu. I only knew English from my time in Australia. And as a toddler, I apparently knew Swahili, but I forgot all that. So yeah, it was a real interesting transition from my birthplace to Australia to Pakistan, and of course, with Pakistan comes cricket. So as an intro, that's pretty much my background, and happy to share my tales of how it went from that to collecting at your pleasure.
Perfect. So in Pakistan, how long were you living there for?
I think we stayed there for around 12 years. Yes, that'd be about right, because I was 8 when we went to Pakistan, and we returned to Australia when I was 20. So that's about 12 years. And so started off integrating into life in Karachi. And when you're a kid growing up in Karachi, well, there's two things that were very obvious to me. One is that I was an outsider. I was an Australian from their perspective. And so I was always the Aussie in the group. And the second was that we had a common interest in cricket. So we started with tape ball cricket on the streets of Karachi. And it's an interesting tale of how cricket evolved in my life, because I had no real knowledge of the game until I started hanging out with kids my age. And I remember Karachi's a volatile sort of place, and every now and then grown-up problems have interesting consequences for kids. So every now and then there'd be some flare-up of rioting in that city. It's a huge city with lots of population and lots of, it's a cauldron of emotions and economy and poverty and corruption and some good stuff as well. And every now and then there'd be riots, and the government would react with curfews to get the people off the streets. And the heyday for kids at my age, at 12, 14, whatever, was during the curfew. The main roads were excellent cricket pitches.
Perfect.
And it's a memory that has stuck with me, because it was quite surreal when I look at it with an adult lens. So here we were, a neighborhood full of kids, set of stumps set up on, some kind of crates or something set up on the main roads, tape ball cricket, tennis ball covered in electrical tape because it zings around everywhere. And I remember that the neighborhoods, because the area I was in, the houses were pretty close together and neighbors all looked out for each other. there'd been a number of neighbours' houses where their gates were open for us because we're in a curfew and we're not supposed to be on the streets. And you're playing cricket on the main roads, and then you hear these early warning alarms. So there'd be some rattling of metal poles clanging from a distance. And that was people signalling that a military armored personnel carrier is doing their patrol. And so you better get off the street.
So you just scatter out of the street.
So we scatter off into these houses that have the gates open for us. And the odd foolhardy teenagers that were full of bravado would play chicken and try to stay out longer for brownie points. And yeah, a lot happened there that was interesting. Sometimes they'd get picked up and then dropped off somewhere 6, 8, 10 kilometres away with no transport. They'd have to leg their way home. So interesting kind of introduction to cricket.
Did you become one of those in your teenage years, or was it
always a coward, mate? I'm a nerd. I was in someone's house before the ABC started rumbling down the road. So yeah, no, I was not very brave when it came to that. Nor was I a very good cricketer, but I do remember that in the neighbourhood we had a ex-Pakistani cricketer who had been selected for maybe one test match in New Zealand. And he was a great guy, awesome work ethic and practice, and he'd always be kind of practicing with his brothers and stuff like that. And he taught me how to knock in a cricket bat by using a ball in a sock hanging off a rope and just go at it. And I remember this... I used to pretend I was Greg Chappell. I was lousy at cricket, but I used to think, hey, I'm an Aussie, I'm Greg Chappell. I can relate to Greg Chappell. And so I would pretend that I'm Greg Chappell.
Did you put on the underarm before you
I don't think it had happened then, or maybe the
probably not. No, I thought I needed to get that in.
Yeah, of course you do. As a Kiwi, you have to take all your chances and all your pot shots when you can. But yeah, no, I used to spend many hours just even on my own, just knocking a ball around on a string and on a rope, and it was great. It was a great introduction to cricket. From a collecting perspective, back then I recall I was fascinated with stamps and comic books. And cricket, the closest I came to collecting in those days, my mum used to have a store account because Dad was ill and she had to go to work. And so the kids were kind of asked to fend for themselves a little bit. And one of the luxuries we had is that the local Cornish store had an account with that Mum had an account with, and the policy was if you need anything, just pop down to the store and help yourself. And I remember I got in trouble one month because when Mum went to settle her tab, there were several boxes of tea packets. Like we're talking 20 boxes of tea packets containing 100 satchels each. And she said, "What's this on my account?" And the storekeeper just said, "I think you better have a chat with Naz." And it turns out that those packets used to have little postcards with Indian cricketers in them. And yes. I remember Mahendra Ramanath and Bishan Bedi and all those guys from that era were featured in that. And so I used to I did not even consume tea, by the way. I just used to buy the packets of tea, take out the cards, and ditch the tea packets because I never thought I'd get caught. But that didn't last long. But that was my only foray into cricket collecting at that age, though I really loved the game itself. Yeah, so that was the early part of my upbringing in Karachi. Quite an interesting and different lens.
Wow. And then you moved to Australia in your 20s?
That's correct. Yes.
What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was interesting actually. My loyalty switched as well along the way, and I see this as a safe space. I'll be perfectly candid about this. So
Hmm.
in Pakistan, I was the Aussie, and I saw the Aussies as the underdog because everyone locally was cheering for the Pakis, of course.
Hmm.
When I moved back to Australia, I did have some adjustment issues, and I did have a really fondness towards Wasim Akram and Imran Khan,
Yes.
and so that kind of bled in. And then my loyalties were slightly divided. I never really knew who to support from that point on.
Great. It's great,
Fortune
though.
gave
I love it.
though. Remember in '92, all of Australia was supporting Pakistan because we were playing the Poms in the World Cup final. So there you go. There was the meshing of the two cultures where suddenly I could cheer on the Packies and not be
Yeah,
embarrassed
perfect.
trying to cheer them on. But I think I have an attachment towards the underdog, and that's the thing that kind of has stuck with me. But of
So
course,
then you've become a Black Caps fan, I guess. If you're an Underdogs fan, you become a Black
well,
Caps
I
fan.
haven't moved to New Zealand, so yeah, let's stay tuned on that one. We never know if there's another switch in the making. But yeah, I moved back here in my 20s, and I was looking around for things to do. And as I mentioned, I used to collect stamps and I used to collect comic books. And I don't know how, but I was randomly at a stamp and coin club. I guess the interest was still strong, and I went to have a gander. And I came across a set of stamps from Australia from 1977. They were a strip of caricatures, if you like, or comics. So you kind of get the attachment there that, hey, I was attracted to this kind of style of cartoons and
Perfect.
comics and caricatures. And so that caught my attention, and that was it. I was hooked. I was, okay, I'm going to continue collecting stamps and coins, but the subject will be cricket. And so suddenly I'm starting to collect cricket stuff. And then another evolution happened. With stamps comes first day covers. For those that don't know it, they're just envelopes with stamps stuck on them, and you can pop them into the post with an address on it, and they'll get delivered from house to house or whatever. And the opportunity there came when I realized that first day covers are excellent to get signed by cricketers.
Yeah.
So there was a pivot into, oh, wow, I'm going to start collecting autographs as part of my stamps and coins. And the next evolution was trading cards, and it just led from one thing to another. Trading cards is where I really found my passion. And
Yeah.
it was the Futera 93 set following the World
Future
Cup.
is amazing. Future is amazing.
Beautiful, beautiful cards, random opening of packs, something completely alien to someone from my background where I had never really paid attention to trading cards before then. And there was all that excitement about South Africa back in the fold with John T. Rhodes and Hansi Cronje
Yeah,
and
sure.
Alan Donald, and it just
Alan
Brian
Donald.
McMillan, all those great players, and yeah, it just became the absolute switch that I needed. And from there, the focus went trading cards, autographs. They're made for each other. So I started writing to cricketers and sending them cards, asking them to sign them for me. And I think 8,000 signed autographs later, I'm
8,000.
still
8,000.
passionate about them. Yes, I love it. I love it. I have slowed down now, though, and we can go into a bit more detail there. But I must tell you about another connection. So I mentioned I used to pretend I was Greg Chappell, and I mentioned
Yes.
that I was into comic books and caricatures. Well, this is how things lead from one connection to another. So one day I came across the Wheat Bix set of cards, caricatures by an artist from England, John Ireland.
Okay.
1994, there was a 1991 version of the set as well, produced by County Print. But the ones familiar to us in Australia was the 1994 Wheat Bix set. and it had McGrath and Bevan and the War brothers and Shane
Oh,
Warne.
that's right.
Uh,
McGrath. Yeah, McGrath's in the team. Who else is in that team? That
yeah,
team is
Hayden
amazing.
Langer was there. I'm not sure about the Wars. Oh, yeah, Steve War was
The Wars
definitely
had
on.
to have been there, 94, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I saw these
Healy would have been
caricatures.
the keeper then too, I think.
That's right. Yep.
That's right.
Actually, Tim Zurer, I think, was the keeper on that set.
Oh, wow.
I think
Okay.
from memory. But I discovered John Ireland's caricatures through the Wheat Bix set. And then I discovered that he had published a few caricature books. And they were just amazing to me. They were just brilliant. And just randomly, out of the blue one day, I found his email address and I simply paid him a compliment and said, "Man, I really love your caricatures." Well, we started conversing. We became reasonably good friends. At least I saw him as a friend. Lovely, lovely person. And he said to me, I've got all these caricatures that have never been published. They're sitting in my desk drawer. And if you want to do something with them, I'm amenable. His idea was another book, but his idea of a book was beyond my capabilities. He wanted a proper ISBN number. He wanted
Mm-hmm.
royalties that publishers get and things of that nature. And plus you'd need to write a nice blurb on every player, every caricature that features, and
Sure.
it was just too much for me. But what I did know was cards. Like, man, I'll print some cards. So I commissioned a few personal pieces to try and make up a full set. So there was some that he had already had in his collection ready to be released to the world. And I asked for some of my favorites to be added on. And so I produced in 2013 my first set of Cow Corner caricature cards featuring John Ireland's caricatures. Now, here's the connection, and you'll like this too, because I needed to have signature cards, right? You can't have a set of cards and not have signature cards. So I don't know any cricketers. How am I going to get signature cards? So I started randomly writing to cricketers that I thought might be approachable. And the two that responded, Greg Chappell, Sir Richard Hadley. I mean,
wow,
what
Hadley too. Yeah, cool.
So Cow Corner
Amazing.
basically had two signature cards in it, Chappell and Hadley. And so there's that connection from pretending I was Greg Chappell to having Greg Chappell sign some cards for me. And the whole comic book transition to caricatures. It just, it was meant to be. So that's my card collecting journey. It's funny how nostalgia plays a role, and connections are made from one country to another. And it's interesting, isn't it, how fate leads you down certain paths.
That's great. What a great story. That's so cool. And I love that Hadley's on board too, obviously being a Kiwi, and he was our greatest cricketer for so long. Possibly
Absolutely.
still is. I feel like Williamson is right there. I think it's out of those two, to be honest. It really is
for
out of
sure.
those two guys. But Hadley's been such an amazing advocate for New Zealand and for cricket around the world. And I've been watching a lot of highlights of his lately, and he was so perfect in his technique and such a great cricket player on top of that. And for him and Chappell on top, that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, it was an absolute pinnacle of my collecting to do that. And I'll hasten to add, whilst I produce these for commercial purposes to recoup my costs, because it cost an absolute fortune to look after the artist, and the cricketers' fees went to charities that they had nominated. It was all about what I could have for my collection. So my goal after that was to get the set signed for myself. And I'm happy to say I pretty much achieved that. So the 2013 set, I have every single caricature in there of every living player at the time signed. So I'm quite chuffed with that whole thing. That's the cricketing card journey, transition from stamps and coins to where I am now. Yeah.
That's so cool. So, how long have you been collecting cricket cards for now? If you went from the time you went into that store to now, how many years has that been?
Well, I'm an old guy. You see the grey hair. Yeah, it's been a 30 something year journey for sure. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, 35-year journey. I will add that the last 4 or 5 years, I've actually lost that desire to carry on with modern releases. I've
Hmm.
still trying to complete old sets, the Scanlons and the Futuras that I don't have signed. So
Yeah.
the effort is still there, the passion is still there, but its focus has changed to try to complete older sets rather than
Okay.
chase the modern stuff. And it happened organically. It wasn't a conscious decision. But one of the things that has changed in collecting over the years is um, there's a lot of resistance from modern players to sign cards for collectors, especially
Hmm.
if a player, someone like David Warner, for example, appears on a dozen cards. He views it with the lens of, oh, why do you need a dozen copies of my signature? They're all different cards, but they don't understand that. They go, I've signed one. Why do you need 12? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of resistance from players to sign for people because they just assume that they're destined for eBay. And in a lot of
Hmm.
cases, their skepticism is justified. I
Sure.
recall I had corresponded in the early days with Terry Alderman, and he used to sign absolutely everything I used to send him in the post. And then in the last 10 years, he suddenly stopped signing things. And
Interesting.
one day he was running a coaching clinic in my neck of the woods. So I went and saw him in person. I said, Terry, you don't sign when I send stuff through the post. And he just said, oh, yeah, look, most people are just looking to profit out of my signature, so I don't sign things anymore. But he was happy to sign in person. So there's been a very much a collective kind of resistance to signing by cricketers, and their minders have the same kind of view. And so it's become less of um, a attraction to travel all the way to a cricket ground, 3 hour drive, 4 hour drive from Bathurst, because you may come home with, maybe no signatures. And it just, the appeal has kind of waned a little bit. Plus, cricketers don't respond, as I said, through the post anymore, or most of them don't anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like New Zealand and Australia were those two outlier type countries where you could approach a player and get an autograph. But you're right. I think when they start seeing the big picture and they start looking at people who might be scalping off those cards and selling them, then it does definitely make them a little bit more reticent to want to be able to sign for us. So I went to a rugby game recently, obviously being wintertime here, and the players were all around about and they were very happy to sign my cards, which was cool. I haven't been able to get to a Black Caps game yet, but I'll take them along and see how they do. But I guess I'm going to have to be ready to be almost denied sometimes, I guess. But maybe
I,
they'll
I
sign one. And
Yeah, no, I think that it's a symptom of Australian cricketers being the most resistant than anything else. I mean,
okay,
when Brendan McCullum and his gang were down in Australia for the last T20 World Cup or something, mate, they were signing everything. But there's been also a shift in focus. I think some collectors have seen a letter that came from Cricket Australia, basically saying that people getting multiples of something signed will be under scrutiny and they may be asked to leave the premises and things like that. And
really,
from a fellow collector talking to the officials in charge of that policy, I think it's a bigger picture. It's not only that they're worried about scalpers, but they're also worried about corruption and approaches to players that lead to something more nefarious. So
okay,
there's a bit of, I guess, there's a bit of there's a bit of discoloring of the hobby in this new world where corruption plays a bigger role, and players are more protective of their IP, etc. So I think it's a good time for old school guys like myself to kind of step aside a little bit, because the landscape of collecting cricket cards has changed a bit. But that's not to say that it's all doom and gloom and that you shouldn't do it. I have some pointers for collectors and how to start, what to do, and we can get into that as well when you're ready.
Yeah, I think we can almost do that right now. I know there are a few people who've been interested in cricket card collections and where to start and what to do. I guess my favorite era of cricket card collecting is that Futera time. It's the 90s. It's Warren and Tendulkar and Brian Lara. They were just three very, very memorable players. And then you could talk about the Curtly Ambroses and the Glenn McGraths and the list goes on from the 90s. And I love that time and place. And I would often in the summertime just watch when Australia would host two teams and they'd have that tri-series of one-dayers. And those games were just fabulous.
Brilliant.
It was
absolutely
awesome.
agree.
It really was.
There was this real kind of feel or vibe around it of this fraternity of different cricketers, and they compete really hard, but they also get along afterwards. And it just was this amazing feel to, and of course the Kerry Packer innovation in cricket. I guess modern day cricket has diluted a bit more, right? It's more T20. There's too much of it. There's the IPL. There's the PSL, and there's all these different leagues, a Caribbean League, and it's like there's a dilution there, and it's kind of, it has changed, but it may bring new audiences. So whilst guys like myself feel that we're no longer part of that journey, it's opening the doors up for more female cricketers, for more women to get involved in the sport and support it, and the youngsters are obviously always welcome at T20 matches, and autographs are going around, no issues. So I think there's a time and a place for various things, and the 90s and the Tri-Series and the things that you mentioned, and the Futera and the Scanlons and even the Select cards, that was, for our generation, the amazing time of it. And now it's kind of a different generation, and it has a different feel to it. But the best thing,
I feel like, here you go. I feel like now the cricket I really enjoy watching is the Test matches, and I, in particular, like the Ashes have been just fabulous. Such great contests, and they're real arm wrestles, and I think that's down to a little bit of Brendan McCullum again with his Bazball philosophy versus the Australians, and it was just so much fun. And then that recent West Indies that win that they had in the Test series was amazing too. So there's been some fun Test cricket lately. The World Cup was fun for New Zealanders for a minute there as well. When we beat the Aussies in the first game, I think it was great fun. So there's been some moments there for sure.
Yeah, definitely, yes, and yes, it as I said, the best thing about collecting cricket cards is it's accessible to everyone in different ways, and nothing I say here is meant to discourage a young collector. Autographs are there to be had, and even Warner will likely sign for a lot of kids. But you can see that the nature of collecting has changed a bit. There's a bit of Americanization in it. We've seen with the Topps release. First of all, the design of the Topps card that have just come out, chef's kiss. I mean, what nice looking cards.
Yeah.
But I missed out because I procrastinated. And the reason I procrastinated on buying a set of those is the issue is too limited, right? There are one-of-one cards in there. And there's a recognition that it would be very difficult to get a set of all the autographs in that series. So the nature of collecting has changed a lot in the last few years. It's more Americanized. It's more, I think, geared towards the exclusivity of a card and the value of a card rather than, hey, here's a card that a number of people can all enjoy. But
Mm-hmm.
not taking away from the quality of it, that they've done an amazing job. I think they're some
Yeah,
of the nicest.
they look
I've seen.
fabulous.
Yeah, they do. The artwork is brilliant. The design's
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. The only other negative, if I am going to kind of pick at it too much, is the autographs are on stickers rather than on card,
That's right.
and that's
That's
a
right.
very American thing as well. But
Yeah,
for a purist like me, that's not quite what I want to see. But
it's not
they're
cricket.
still amazing. It's not cricket. That's right. Have you also noticed with cards lately the slabbing of cards and the whole grading of cards has
Oh, it's
become
massive. It's massive.
and that still I think I don't belong in this era now where all of that has a priority. I mean, we're seeing $1 cards being slabbed and sold for 10 times the price, and it's
Easy,
odd.
100
It's
times the price
odd.
sometimes too.
Yeah, quite right. So yeah, it's interesting. But my advice to young collectors is do it for the right reasons. Do it because you enjoy it. Get them signed, get the cards signed, get autographs and keep them in your collection because that makes them unique. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter if a card is a common card. If it's got an autograph on it, it's unique. So, enjoy that and just have fun. Go out there and enjoy the cricket and get some autographs and come home with a
Yeah,
smile
yeah,
on
I
your.
agree. I'm all about the autos too. My buddy who I do the podcast with isn't. He's like, well, I think there's that sense of it being exclusive, as you say. And so sometimes we push that exclusivity onto the autos as well. But I think what I like about the autos is when you go and get the autograph from that person, it reminds you of that moment when you were with them and you had that 30-second exchange with that player. And that's why I love the in-person autos myself. Um, but I like having that nostalgia element, as you say. It's fun, and it's something that I think is kind of unique to New Zealand and Australian culture because a lot of other places they will not be able to get even to the players. There's loads of security around, and they're just not even accessible abroad. But here in Australia, I feel like we could walk up to players like Tim Doka if he was somehow in the country. You could walk up to him on the street and he'd be absolutely fine because it's like it's New Zealand. It's a small place. No one's going to hurt me here. Sure, I'll sign your card and go on. It can happen here, but if he were to try and do that in India, he'd be on the side of the street for days on end.
Yeah, quite right. And yes, that is something that is unique to us and even South Africa that are quite
That's right.
approachable. And yeah, it is something that is not all that accessible in the subcontinent because the sheer volume of fans and how quickly they get mobbed. So there's no opportunity or very little opportunity to line up and get cards in an organized manner because everyone's out there. And of course, the culture has changed where everyone wants selfies, or a lot of people want selfies. So that makes it even harder for autograph hunters because you're kind of competing against people that require a bit more extra time to set up their cameras and or point and focus and all that type of stuff. So it's interesting. There has definitely been a shift in the way collecting is done. I think there is a natural progression towards an Americanization of the collecting hobby. And whilst I see it as a detriment, I see it from my lens, and it's full of nostalgia and corresponding with players and writing to Sir Donald Bradman and getting an entire set of Weet-Bix cards signed. I think I'm just
Wow.
looking at it from the lens of nostalgia more than anything else. So I accept that times have changed, collecting has changed. You will not convince me that slabbing of cards and grading them is of absolute importance in a cricket sense. But I do not begrudge people that put value to that because everyone deserves their own way of collecting. And if they
That's right.
feel happy to have a slabbed card and feel that the grading of something as mint or near mint or something adds something to that card. Well, who am I to complain about it? I I, uh, I have mentioned in previous times. Topps produced a cricket Adam Gilchrist bat card where a piece of his cricket bat was embedded in the trading card, and the card was limited to only 36, I believe. And I went and got that signed, and by Gilchrist, of course. And I remember that caused a bit of a stir amongst purists, collectors who felt that I had basically defiled that card because it was no longer in its pristine, original, unsigned shape. But I
Especially
was told,
being limited to 2035.
yeah, exactly. But my philosophy has always been whether the card's a $1 card or a $500 card or $1,000 card, the signature is what I'm all about, and that's my way of
Yeah.
collecting. So it's interesting. People have different views, and there's room in this kind of hobby to have your different views and collect your way. There's no right or wrong way. Just because Naz has been doing it for 30 years does not make him the expert on it. There are
Yeah.
a lot of card collectors who I've had the pleasure of meeting that just absolutely blow my mind with the amount of knowledge they have, the quality of their collections. And if you were to start interviewing them all, you'll be very busy with your podcast for years to come.
Great, great. I love it. I mean, just even hearing your story about how your experience came full circle when you wanted to beat Greg Chappell, and then you ended up getting his signature on those cards of yours. It's incredible. So that's pretty much the main reason why we do this podcast, to be honest, and also just to give people a little bit more information. Now, obviously, I'm trying to get back into cricket cards, and my area is the 90s. But if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit more background on cards in general, like maybe with a few more specifics and what it was like in the 90s, and then maybe even moving up to today, or even if you wanted to go further back than that, just any little tidbits of what cricket card collecting is like, and maybe just giving us a bit of scale and that sort of thing would be great.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the main cards from my point of view, if you look at the transition of it, cigarette cards were the original OG, as they call it, and they were brilliant. The artwork, the
Beautiful,
quality of them,
beautiful cards.
yeah, absolutely. And to think that they were, inserted with a pack of cigarettes back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And I recall you did a podcast with a good friend, Stephen Fleming, who is an absolute fountain of knowledge with cigarette cards and early card collecting, and of course, a published author on cards. To me, that was really the starting point of finding these amazing relics from the past. The only downside from my perspective as an autograph hunter was it
Yeah.
was an era too far gone, and unfortunately, no survivors or very few survivors of those early eras, and so modern day cards then starting with Futura and even Scanlens. Actually, Scanlens were relatively accessible. You had the Simon O'Donnells and Ian Healy's and Mark Taylor and a lot of the modern guys in the early Scanlens 89, 90 series, and a little bit earlier than that, the 85, 86 series, Colin Croft and a lot of those West Indian players that were just amazing. So it's been
Amazing.
really interesting to just find the scale of availability is quite high. You don't think that you're going to come across cards from early 80s or late 60s and early 70s, and yet they're still accessible. Ardmona cards for $100, you could pick up a set of 50 odd cards from the Ardmona series of cards, and that was I think, was it Ardmona was like tin tomatoes and vegetables, weren't they? Something like that. That
Oh, wow, I've
sponsored that.
never heard of them.
Haven't you? Okay, right. Yeah, well, there's been some amazing cards out there and featuring. So for me, the variety of what's out there is amazing. They're still very accessible. They're still quite cheap. If you don't fall into the trap of seeking out the slabbed and the graded cards, you'll find that you can pick up the same cards in reasonable condition for very little money. And then it's all up to your style of collecting, whether you want to just keep sets together or collect certain countries and players, or how you like to organize it thematically, and whether there's a possibility to get some signed where the players are still around. So there's a lot of volume. I up to, I guess, the end of Futera and some of the select cards, that's where my interest started waning. That's where it morphed for me into cow corner cards. And that became my focus of my own cards, and to have them and get them signed and all that kind of stuff. So that became my focus. So I can't really speak to the TLA cards and the more modern cards. Even cricket attacks eludes me a little bit because there's a lot of it. There are a lot of Topps cricket attacks cards from the IPL. There's some from the 100 series now. And of course, we've got the latest Topps that we spoke about, which are just absolutely gorgeous, but so limited in numbers that it's kind of hard to pinpoint how to feel about it, because I think a lot of scalpers got hold of them and now they're being sold for 2 or 3 or 4 times the original issue price. And so as a collector, and so as a collector, they become inaccessible, and you go, do I even bother dipping my toes into that? But man, they are nice designs. There's no doubt about it.
They're beauties, all right. They are beauties. Yeah, hey, can you explain a little bit about, just for people who probably are not Kiwis or Australians, what cow corner is?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, John Ireland had caricatures in 2013 that I put into a set. So I created a set of 50 cards. The first 100, I printed 1,000 sets of the first series, and the first 100 was signed by Chappell and Hadley. So there was a bit of exclusivity there. And then, of course, I couldn't be satisfied with just one series. So I went back to the well, and with John Ireland's kind permission, I reused and repurposed some of his earlier caricatures that were published in his books. And I produced a set called the World Class set, and it features Viv Richards and Brian Lara and some of those classic players. And and then it evolved into commissioning artwork from other artists. So even as late as 2023, I released a version of Cow Corner caricature cards using a different artist who prefers to remain anonymous, but amazing artwork. And I've commissioned a set of all my favorite players. And so the hope is to try to do at least one release a year, but it's not pragmatic always, because the cost of producing cards and paying the artists what they deserve, I don't try to lowball them or do anything like that. It's never about the profit. But until you recoup your expenses, it's hard to keep going back to the well each time. But I'm very proud of Cow Corner as a product and a brand. The naming and the logo of Cow Corner was my own design, and it was just some kind of, I think deep down inside, I want to be an artist, but I have no skills. So I make do with Photoshop. And so whilst I commission the artwork, I take a bit of delight in the design of the cards, the background of the card, the color selection of the card. Cool. And the logo is a cricket ball with a map on it, and a cow Frisian style map, so it's white and black. And so Cow Corner, all kind of blending in these various terms. So the terminology of Cow Corner, a cricket ball image, a map image, all blended into one cricket ball shaped logo, and they're just a bit of fun. And
Great.
you see
That's
the
great.
nerd in me comes out, and I want to just design this stuff and produce different variations and things like that. So it's just a lot of fun. And that's
Yeah,
what
I
it's.
think that's living the dream. I think that's living the dream as a card collector. I think everybody who collects cards is like, I really like that design. And then after a while, when you start looking at designs of cards that you like, you're like, I think I could design a better card than this. Become very critical of certain cards. And so you're living the dream being able to do that.
Mate,
Absolutely.
with a guy with zero skills, I'm proud of what I've achieved, but I give the due respect to the ones that actually produce amazing looking
Yeah.
cards.
Yeah.
And so there's never any kind of ego involved in that. Oh, my cards are better than those cards because, I mean, I can't get past the Futura 93 set. That's one of my absolute favorites. The
Yeah, that's a
ESP
beauty.
set, the nice multicolored ESP set, 2004, I think, from memory. I'd have to check my database. I should talk to you about my database as well, because there's a genesis to that as well. So anyone who has come across nazimcricket.com,
Mhm.
they may be forgiven to think that it's some kind of ego trip, because it features everything in my collection. But what it actually is my online catalog. And the genesis
Smart,
of
man.
it
That's great.
is when I used to collect coins and stamps. I would come across. I'd go to a stamp show out of town somewhere, and I'd come across a random item. And I can't tell you, embarrassingly, I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. I'd come across some nice looking coin, and I'd go, "Oh, that's brilliant! I got to buy that." And so I would buy it, and I'd bring it home. And when I'm looking to catalog it in my own database at the time, I'd find I already had that coin, and I didn't. I had it. And so I fell into this trap of not being able to keep tabs of what I do have in my collection and what I don't have. And so having a public database means that no matter where I'm at, I can do a search on it and see, hey, do I have this item or do I
So
need this item? And
yeah.
the cards became even more valuable to me, because one of the best parts about having a database is, well, let me put it this way. Jeff Thompson was in town in Bathurst, and you seldom see someone of his caliber in a small country town. So I took some Admona cards and a few Jeff Thompson cards, 93 Futura card that he featured in, and I took them with me and I got them signed. And my database was not fully formed at that time. And I came home, and worse than finding that I already had an item was finding that I forgot to take one of the best cards that was in the collection, the Elite 11 card from Futura. And I could not get it signed because I had
That's
missed that
worse. Yeah, that's
opportunity.
worse.
So now my database actually has a search feature by player. So if I hear Jeff Thompson's in town, I plug in his name, and it
Oh
gives me a
man, that's so
full
cool.
index of every single card with visuals, where I've kept up with the cataloging of every card he appears in that I know of. And that way I can quickly go, all right, he appears in all these cards. These ones marked with the check I've got, these ones marked with the cross I don't have. I better get that signed, or things of that nature. So
Oh,
the
that's
genesis
great.
of
That's so
cricket,
smart. That's so smart for
it's
a
an
um
essential.
for a collector. For a collector, and the amount of people I've talked to on the show who have their own databases of the cards that they have. It's almost every single card collector that I talk to on the show. Oh, and my database. And I'm like, oh man, it's what it is. And so, but yours being online like that, I think now with if you do it with something like Google Sheets, you'll be able to access it online now. But I love that extra feature where you put the player's name in and you're getting the card as well as the photo. So
Yeah,
smart. That's really cool.
yeah. So, I also sometimes like to think that other fellow collectors may benefit from looking at that. This is not a plug for the website. I'm not trying to push anything. I don't
No, no, no,
profit
no, no.
from anything, but
I didn't at all.
it's a nice thought to think that someone may find it useful. But I certainly do, and
Yeah,
that's
perfect.
designed.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah, I've had fun looking through your database of cards. By the way, myself got some really great ones in there, and and I absolutely see your penchant for signatures for autographs because there's a bunch of them in there. I'm like, wow. And now I know that you have 8,000 of them. That's so cool.
Yeah, something like that. Last time I checked, I've not been looking at the site for a while, but yeah, the counts are all there, and it helps me keep kind of tabs on what sets I need to complete. So I have a wish list there, and I
I
every
saw
now and
that
then
too.
will come across other collectors who want to trade and things like that. I must say I'm a prickly trader. I try to keep it equitable, so similar series, similar caliber of players. So as I'm at the pointy end of my collecting, I'm not as useful to collectors starting out because most of what they want to trade with me I've already got.
Yeah.
But you know, if someone can still benefit from keeping tabs on what's there and looking for cards that they're kind of wanting to trade, it's a good way to bring people together. I've made a lot of friends in the hobby just by virtue of having that online presence. So it's been nothing but positive. So yeah, I recommend it to anyone starting out. If that's your jam, you know, create a database. I'm a database administrator by profession, by the way. So the nerdy one
Okay.
aspect of
Yeah.
that comes along, and I love the coding and the SQL scripts and all the unique ways you can catalog things. It's just me. I'm just, yeah, that kid from Karachi collecting things and hoarding things and cataloging things. That's just me.
Hey, before we go, I know you didn't really want to talk about any cards in particular in your collection, but would you mind telling me who your either three or top five cricketers are in order? I think I know what your number one is. I think you've mentioned him a few times.
Yeah, look, that's the primary reason I did not want to talk about it because I have such a strong bias towards Cow Corner. It just seems like self
Yeah,
promotion. But
yeah,
let's
it's
talk
fair.
about cards I really do like and love the player and the card. The Shane Warne hat trick card, absolutely gorgeous design.
Yes, it's a
One of the
monster.
nicest cards I've seen. The Gilchrist bat card I've mentioned earlier, I love that.
Hmm.
Here's a couple of surprising ones for you. The Allen Border Buttercup card.
Okay,
The I did not even know about its existence. It was a random signature card that came out of Buttercup bread packets. And a fellow
okay,
collector came across one. He noticed a different style of design, so it caught his eye. And when he turned it over, it said on the back this was a signature card, and it quality wise it's just paper thin, but it's just a lovely surprise out of the blue. And so it took a while for me to try and acquire one, and I did manage to get hold of it. So that's one of my favorite cards. Nothing special about it, just got this nostalgic feel to it. The Buttercup scratch cards and that era of collecting where it was all about fun and your heroes. So that's another special card in my collection that I really enjoy. And of course, yeah, as I said, Cal Corner and Greg Chappell, Richard Hadley, Jacques Callis, I designed a card in a couple of different styles and got him to sign some for me.
oh, cool.
And I really enjoyed the design aspect of it because it was something slightly different to what I'd done before. Chris Lynn, I did a signature card with him in a comic book style. So again, harking back to that other
Very cool.
passion. So yeah, it's kind of a eclectic mix of some cool stuff produced by well-known companies and some obscure stuff like the Buttercup things, and of course my own product. And that's just me because I just love caricatures. I'm proud to share with the audience that John Ireland has been very kind to me, and I was able to acquire a lot of his original artwork and
Wow.
just to have the actual A3 size hand colored caricatures in my possession is just an absolute delight. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's just a bit of everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's and I think that's what it is. It doesn't have to be it also doesn't have to be a super rare or highly expensive card if it just is there for either nostalgic purposes or it just speaks to you as a card. Like you said, the card that came out of the bread packets, like amazing. Yeah, really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and it's also about preserving history. I
Hmm.
still have a fascination towards cigarette cards. The issue is that I don't know enough about them, and I don't have a good handle on the exclusivity of them. And so they're almost an afterthought. I will always buy them if I find them at a decent price, but I don't have enough knowledge about it. But I still love them, and so
Yeah.
it's just this just whole raft of collecting that you do from end to end, and it's hard to pick favorites. It's like, which one's your favorite, child?
Yeah, it's fair. That's fair. And as you said, those cigarette cards are just when you see some of them and when you see them in person, they really still just pop off the page, and you're like, "Is this really 100 years old? Is this really that old?" And the answer is
Isn't
yes,
it
it is. And
interesting?
look,
Yeah, yeah.
it's stunningly good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about, yeah, preserving history and collecting things that are meaningful to you, and there could be anything. You could be into any number of things, but I can't recommend enough collecting cricket cards and getting autographs on them. That's the best thing ever, in my view. If your audience may not be able to see the video, I don't know, but behind me is a whole bookshelf full of all my cards, and that's one of the benefits of cards as well. That storage is easy,
That's
much
right.
like
It doesn't take up
stamps.
that much space.
Yeah,
That's what I tell my
yeah.
wife.
Well, that's right. You got to get away with something, right? I mean, I did dabble with match-worn gear for a while, and I think I've acquired a good 300 odd pieces of match-worn gear, which is
Oh, wow.
enormous. But man, the storage of that stuff is frightening. So yeah, you kind of go, the madness has to stop somewhere.
That's
But
right.
yeah, the passion's still there, and yeah, much like your wife, most people don't understand this nerdiness, but it's great fun though.
Hey, look, Nazril, I've had a really great time in this conversation, and I think what people can get out of it, it really is that collecting can be something that will last your entire life. So even though you might not be as into the modern cards as some of the cards from the '90s, you're still collecting to this day, and you still love it just as much as probably the day when you first walked into that store all those years ago. But I really appreciate you coming on the show too. I know it's a good bit of your time to talk about collecting and that sort of thing, but I've had a great time.
I appreciate the kind words, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm honored that you asked me.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Unless you've got anything else to say before we go.
No, again, thanks very much for having me. It's been great fun. I'm sorry I'm such a chatterbox, but that's just
No,
me.
that's what we want. That's what we want. That's what we want. All right, buddy.
We'll see how your audience responds to the high pitched voice coming across on the speakers.
All right. We'll see you.
All right. Thanks very much.